The candle had burned to its last inch when Mira overheard the bargain that would become her life. She was not meant to be in the corridor at all. The hour was wrong. Her crutch made noise against the stone, and she had learned long ago that the wrong hour in the wrong place was a luxury the invisible could not afford. But the pain in her hip had woken her, and the kitchen fire called, and so she was there, pressed flat against the tapestry, when her father's voice carried through the library door with the bright, hard clarity of a man concluding business. She did not know yet what the words would cost her. Had she known, she would have stood there all the same, because Mira Ashwell had always preferred the truth at whatever price it named. Celeste will refuse him, her father said. She has already refused him twice, and I cannot compel her a third time without losing the connection entirely. But Mira will do as she is told. There was a pause. The other voice she recognized as Lord Pemberton's man of business, a thin, unhurried voice she associated with columns of figures and locked drawers. The Duke of Ashmore is not a man who takes a damaged article without consideration. He will want to know. He wants the debt cleared and the house secured. I will remind him what Mira's mother brought in settlement and what remains of it in trust. She is 23, not 12. Whatever else she is not a burden to him. She manages this household on less than any steward I have paid. She will manage his. And if the Duke finds the arrangement less than he was led to expect, then I trust your employer to be grateful for the settlement and discreet about the rest. He is marrying a name and a trust, Cowell. He is not purchasing a dancer. The library door did not open. The conversation shifted to figures, to dates, to the name of a solicitor. Mira stood in the corridor with her hand flat on the stone wall and her crutch steady beneath her arm, and she thought, Tuesday. Her father had named a date 3 weeks out, and 3 weeks was all the time she had. She did not weep. Weeping was a luxury too, and she had never found much use in it. She was, for those who noticed her at all, which was not many, the Ashwell girl who could not dance. The elder daughter, the plain one. The one who had taken a fever at 14 that left her left hip as it was. Celeste was the younger by 18 months, and the kind of beautiful that made rooms rearrange themselves, golden, laughing, and now apparently ungovernable. Mira had spent 9 years managing this household, keeping the accounts, preserving what remained of the family's solvency through careful arithmetic and the quiet sale of things no one would miss. She was very good at not being missed. She had made a study of it. That her father intended to trade this skill set to a duke she had never met struck her, in that cold corridor, as almost reasonable. The transaction she objected to was the pretense, not a burden to him, her father had said, as though she were a column that had been accidentally entered in both the debit and credit lines. She would have preferred the honest version. She generally did. She went back to her room and did not sleep, and in the morning she began, as was her habit, with the household accounts. Mrs. Potts found her there at 7, which was also habit, Mrs. Potts, who had been at Ashwell since before Mira's mother died, and who regarded the family with the fond exasperation of a woman who has cleaned up after too many floods to be surprised by rain. She set the tea down without being asked, looked at Mira's face, and sat. You heard. I hear everything, Mira said. It is the one advantage of moving slowly. People forget I am coming. Mrs. Potts wrapped both hands around her own cup. She was 60 and built like a good oak beam, and when she had something to say, she said it without decoration. The Duke of Ashmore is not a man I would have chosen for you. My father has a different criterion for choice. Your father, said Mrs. Potts, has the arithmetic sense of a man who believes debts resolve themselves if left in a dark cupboard. What do you know of Ashmore? That he is 31. That his wife died 2 years ago under circumstances that were discussed at length and then abruptly ceased to be discussed, which usually means the discussion was becoming inconvenient for someone. That he has not been seen at any event of consequence in 18 months, that his estate in Wiltshire is considered one of the finest in the county, and that the house here in town is kept closed. That my father owes him £11,000, which makes him a man with a legitimate grievance who has apparently agreed to forgive it in exchange for a wife. Which means either he is very generous or he has something else in view that £11,000 cannot buy. Mrs. Potts looked at her for a long moment. And which do you think it is? I think, Mira said, that I will have 3 weeks to find out. The summons came 4 days later, a brief, formal letter requesting the pleasure of Miss Ashwell's company at Ashmore House, accompanied by her father, for the purpose of introductions. Celeste, who had been informed of the transfer of the Duke's interest from herself to her sister, with an expression of relief so swift and genuine that it had required no decoding, offered to lend Mira her blue silk. Mira thanked her, declined, and wore her own gray. Ashmore House was not closed after all, or not entirely. The ground floor blazed with light, and the butler who met them was the kind of butler who had been in post long enough to have views. He looked at Mira's crutch exactly once, catalogued it, and did not look at it again. She filed that away as information. The Duke was standing at the far end of the drawing room with his back to the fire, which was either a power position or a habit, and she could not yet tell which. He was taller than she had expected, and built with a solidity that suggested outdoor work rather than the studied grace of a man who knows he is observed. His hands were at his sides. His face was composed in the specific manner of a man who has learned to make composition look natural, and Mira, who had spent 9 years reading the faces of creditors across her father's desk, recognized the technique and was briefly interested by it. He looked at her father first, which was courtesy. He looked at her second, and did not drop his gaze to her crutch. What he did instead was look at her face with an attention so unguarded for 1 moment, a fraction of 1 moment, that she nearly stepped back. Then the composure returned, and he said, Miss Ashwell, in a voice that was very quiet and gave nothing away. Your Grace, she said, and thought, the stillness of a man taking a blow without letting his face report it. Dinner was managed, as these dinners always were, around the careful avoidance of every subject that mattered. Her father talked about the weather and the shooting. The Duke's cousin, a man named Hartwell, who sat to Mira's left with the immaculate ease of someone who had never in his life been uncertain of his welcome, talked about the theater. Mira talked when addressed and observed otherwise, which was her method, and by the time the cloth was removed she had established several things. The Duke had not spoken directly to her in 40 minutes, though she had caught him looking 3 times. Hartwell talked a great deal and listened not at all, and the 4th person at table, a woman introduced as the Duke's late wife's sister, Miss Iris Vane, was watching Mira with an attention so careful and so still that it required a great deal of management not to stare back. Miss Vane was beautiful in the way of a miniature, precise, perfect, preserved. She had the hands of a woman who played well, and the face of a woman who knew exactly what she looked like in candlelight. She had spoken perhaps 6 words at dinner, when the gentleman did not withdraw, an irregularity the Duke imposed without ceremony, simply by continuing to sit. She refilled her own wineglass with an unhurried authority that spoke of long habit in this house. That too went into Mira's record. My father says you keep the accounts, the Duke said. She had not expected him to say that. I manage the household. That is not the same thing. No, she agreed. I keep the accounts as well. He looked at her the way a man looks at a thing he is reconsidering, not unkindly, not kindly either, with the particular attention of someone revising an estimate. Ashmore's books are managed by my cousin Hartwell. He has done it for 6 years. Hartwell raised his glass from across the table. Keeps me useful, he said cheerfully. I was not proposing to displace him, Mira said. No, the Duke said. I expect not. He looked away. The conversation was apparently concluded, and Mira was left with the strong impression that something had been communicated in it that she had not quite caught, the way a line of music can pass before you have named the key. Miss Vane watched her leave. The settlement was signed the following Tuesday, which was the date her father had named, though Mira had not been consulted on the timing and learned of the completed document the way she learned most things about her own life, by overhearing her father tell his secretary. The wedding would be in 6 weeks. She had 6 weeks. She spent the first 2 in the ordinary way, managing the Ashwell household's transfer of duties to the woman her father hired in her place, a capable woman named Mrs. Heron, who would do very well, and in quiet correspondence with the Ashmore household's housekeeper, establishing what she was walking into. The housekeeper's name was Mrs. Lamb, and her letters had the faint tightness of a woman navigating something she could not name in correspondence, which was itself a name for something. She spent the 3rd week at Ashmore House, installed in a guest room and given the run of the library, which the Duke had offered in a note so brief it bordered on telegram. The library is open to you. She had written back, thank you. She spent a great deal of time in it, and not reading. The Duke found her there on the Thursday evening, which she had arranged, in the way of someone who knows where the useful accidents happen. He stopped in the doorway. She was at the desk, an account ledger open before her, which was not the household ledger and not her own. It was one she had taken from the 3rd shelf on the left wall, a ledger whose spine bore no date. She did not close it. Those are the household accounts, he said. Not angry, something more careful than angry. For 18 months ago through last November, she said, someone has corrected them. The stillness that came over him was different from his dinner party stillness. This was the stillness of a man recognizing a name he thought only he knew. He crossed the room, stood across the desk from her, and looked at what she had spread before him, 2 columns, her notations in pencil in the margin, light enough to erase. He said nothing for long enough that the fire shifted and settled. Corrected, he repeated finally. The entries for the household expenditure in March and April are altered. Not poorly done, whoever did it knows the method, but the ink on the corrections is slightly different from the surrounding entries, and the hand on the corrected figures is almost identical to the original, but not quite. The pressure changes on the downstroke. She touched a page, not pointing, just present. Someone had access to these books over a period of time and made small adjustments, not large enough to notice in any single quarter, but I added the adjustments across the 18 months, and it is a considerable sum. He looked at her for a long time. You have been here 4 days. 3.5. Why? It was the right question, and she had prepared an answer and then abandoned it. Because your housekeeper's letters were careful in a way that does not come from contentment, and because your cousin Hartwell has managed these books for 6 years and speaks of it with the ease of a man who has never had cause to look over his shoulder, and that ease did not ring right to me. I could be wrong. You are not wrong, he said, and sat down. That was the beginning of something, though neither of them named it that evening. He told her, in the precise, controlled account of a man who has been carrying information alone for too long, that he had noticed discrepancies in the wine and coal accounts the previous winter and had said nothing yet, because he had no proof he trusted, and no one he trusted to test proof against. His wife had handled the household in her lifetime. After her death, Hartwell had stepped in, and it had seemed unkind to question what had been given freely. The word he used for that was foolish. He said it without inflection, as a verdict. "You are not foolish," Mira said. "I trusted incorrectly. That is different." She closed the ledger. Trusting the wrong person is a fact about them, not about you. The error is theirs. He looked at her with the same look she had caught at the first dinner, that fraction of unguarded attention, and this time it lasted a moment longer before the composure returned. "My wife's physician was Hartwell's recommendation," he said. "She was ill for 4 months before she died. I have thought about that since the winter." The room was very quiet. Mira folded her hands on the ledger and did not look away from his face, and gave him the silence he needed to not have to say the rest of it, because some sentences should not be required to complete themselves. After a moment, she said, "I would like to see the household records from the period of your wife's illness, the pharmaceutical accounts, if they are separately kept, the correspondence with the physician. They are in the locked cabinet in the study. Will you give me the key?" He looked at her for a long time, not with suspicion. With the specific look of a man who has been very alone with a very heavy thing and has just been offered help carrying it and is trying to determine whether this is a thing that actually happens. "Why should you help me? You have been in this house 4 days. You owe me nothing. We have not married. The settlement is signed, but because," she said, "if what you are thinking is true, then someone killed your wife and has been living in your house and managing your money for 2 years. And you are about to marry me, which makes me a person in this house. I have a professional interest in the matter, and because it is the right thing to do, I am sorry to be so plain about it. I have found that plainness saves a great deal of time." He was quiet for a moment. Then, very quietly, "I have been told that plainness in a woman is a defect." "By whom?" "Many people. I have found," she said, "that people who dislike plainness in others are usually keeping something." She picked up her crutch. "The key, if you are willing." He reached into his pocket and set it on the desk between them. And she could not help seeing, that his hand was not quite steady when he put it down, and that he looked away immediately, the way a man looks away from something he does not wish to be seen noticing. She understood then what the grip of grief looked like on a steady man, and she put the key in her own pocket and said nothing about it, and that was perhaps the first genuinely kind thing she had done for him, because it cost her nothing to do, and cost him a great deal to need. They did not marry in 6 weeks. They married in 8, because the 6 weeks became occupied with something else entirely, and it was not until the Thursday before the wedding that either of them named aloud what had grown up between the managing of ledgers and the holding of keys and the slow establishment of a person as the one you turn to when the news is bad. The pharmaceutical accounts were in the locked cabinet, as promised. Mira spent 3 evenings with them, cross-referencing the household supplier records and the physician's bills, and on the 4th evening she set 2 documents side by side on the study desk and waited for the Duke. She still called him that, in her head, she had not yet found the other name, to come in from the stables. He came in with mud on his boots and an outdoor quality to him that she had catalogued as one of his signatures. He was a man who worked outside when his mind was occupied. She had learned this by watching his hands, which he treated as instruments. He stopped when he saw her face. "Sit down," she said, which she had not been sure she would say until she said it, and he sat, which she had not been sure he would do. She put the 2 documents where he could see them. This is the physician's bill for the medicines administered during your wife's illness. This is the household supplier's record for the same period. She set her finger at a line in each. The bills match. The quantities are documented. But I asked Mrs. Lamb to find me the empty bottles. She keeps them in the cellar. She always has. She is that sort of person. I was very glad to find it, and there are too many. She waited. The doses billed for would not have filled the number of bottles used, which means more medicine was administered than was prescribed. A great deal more. The Duke looked at the two documents and did not speak. I cannot tell you from these papers alone who administered it, she said. But the physician, as you said, was Hartwell's recommendation, and Hartwell had access to the rooms, and the pharmaceutical account is signed off in Hartwell's hand, because he managed the books, and so even if someone else had asked the question, they would have had only his accounting of it, which he had corrected. The Duke said in a voice she had not heard before. Quiet, the way still water is quiet. Which he had corrected, she said. I am sorry. I am very sorry to have found this. I am not. The quietness was not coldness. She could distinguish them now. I would rather know. He looked at the bottles. He looked at her. What do we do? And that was the second thing. That we, spoken so naturally it clearly went past him without his hearing it, and Mira, who heard everything, heard it precisely, and kept her face composed and said, We invite someone to dinner. The someone was Sir Edward Croft, a magistrate of her father's acquaintance, whom she had met 3 years ago when he had come to resolve a property dispute and had spoken to her with the full attention most men reserved for her father. She had remembered him. She generally remembered people who spoke to her with full attention, because they were few. She wrote to him herself, a brief, careful letter that named no names and asked only that he come, and he replied within the day. She also wrote to the physician, a man named Baxter, in a letter composed with more care, a social note, warmly phrased, from the Duke of Ashmore's household, noting that the family was grateful for the doctor's care during the Duchess's illness and hoped he might attend a small dinner in appreciation. She had the Duke sign it, because she could not sign it herself, and he read it and signed it and looked at her with an expression she filed under, trust, large degree. She did not write to Hartwell. She said nothing to Hartwell. She watched him instead at the 2 dinners preceding the event, and what she observed was a man of extraordinary equanimity. He was pleasant, warm, attentive to Mira in exactly the right measure, not too much, not too little. He knew about the ledger she had found, the Duke had told him, framing it as a curiosity being investigated, and Hartwell had expressed interest and volunteered to review it himself, which the Duke had declined with thanks, citing Mira's progress. Hartwell's response had been smooth as polished glass. He had one tell. When something displeased him, his left hand, resting on whatever surface was available, would press flat, a brief, deliberate flattening, as though establishing ground. She had seen it twice. The night before the dinner, the Duke found her in the library again. It had become a place they met without arranging to meet, which was itself a kind of arrangement. Are you certain? He said. No, but I think certainty is what tomorrow is for. He was standing by the fire, which was the same position in which she had first seen him, and she had learned since that it was not a power position. It was a habit left over from cold winters at a house where the fuel was scarce and the fire was the one warm thing, which he had told her in the way of a man who does not realize he is offering the truth of himself until it is already in the air. There is something I have not told you, he said. She waited. He told her, in the precise, controlled account of a man who has been carrying information alone for too long, My wife, Eleanor. In the last weeks, she wrote to me." He stopped. She could see him choosing the next words. She wrote that she was frightened. Not of dying. She knew she was dying by then, I think. She wrote that she was frightened of something she could not name, and that she had told no one because she did not know who to trust. She told me to be careful of warmth. That was the phrase. Be careful of warmth. He looked at the fire. I did not understand the letter. I received it after she was gone. And I thought, for a long time, I thought she meant me to be careful of my own grief, not to close. I thought she was advising me against solitude. He looked at Mira. I think now she meant something more specific. Mira thought of Hartwell's warm voice, his easy smile, his perpetual pleasant availability, his hand pressing flat on the table surface. "Yes," she said. "I think she did. She would have liked you," he said, in a different voice, and there was something in it she did not try to decode, because some things should be allowed to stay in the air for a moment and find their own resolution. She said, "Then let us finish what she started." The dinner was set for a Thursday, the 9th of October, with autumn come properly in and the candles lit early against the early dark. 8 at table, the Duke, Mira, Hartwell, Miss Vane, Sir Edward Croft with his wife, Dr. Baxter, and a late addition that Mira had arranged without announcement, a woman named Mrs. Agnes Philby, who had been the Duchess Eleanor's personal maid and was now employed elsewhere, and who had replied to Mira's letter with an eagerness that told its own story. Hartwell arrived in good humor, which held through the soup. He greeted Sir Edward with the practiced ease of a man who has no reason to fear magistrates. He greeted Dr. Baxter warmly, with the warmth of familiarity. He glanced at Mrs. Philby with a courteous nod that lasted exactly 1 second, and then contracted. Mira caught it, that brief constriction, and saw his left hand press flat against his thigh. She looked at the Duke. He was pouring wine and did not appear to have seen. She had placed herself beside Baxter at the table. Between the soup and the fish, she said to him, conversationally, the thing she had prepared, "I have been reviewing the household accounts from the Duchess's illness." Fascinating work. I wonder if you could clarify something about the prescribed dosage. I want to make certain the records are correctly transcribed. Baxter was a slight man, sandy-haired, quick-eyed. He turned to her with professional interest. "Of course. What was the question?" "The dosage listed on your bill of the 14th of February. I want to be certain it is the maximum prescribed over the month, or if there was a separate supplementary order." He frowned, a genuine, puzzled frown. There was no supplementary order. The February course was exactly as billed. I was quite conservative in the protocol given the patient's constitution. And you communicated that directly to the household? To Mr. Hartwell, yes, who was coordinating in the Duke's absence that week. I was very clear. The dosage was not to be exceeded. He paused. "Is there a discrepancy?" "Yes," she said. "There is." She said it quietly enough that it did not carry to the other end of the table, and watched Baxter's face undergo the particular shift of a man realizing what he has just confirmed without meaning to, and saw the blood leave it. The fish came and went. The meat arrived. Sir Edward, who had been told enough and was a man of considerable experience, kept the conversation at the table moving with the skill of a practiced host, and Mira ate her dinner and waited, the way her mother had taught her to wait for the right moment in negotiation, not pressing, not retreating, simply present. The moment came between the meat and the pudding, when Hartwell, who had been watching her across the table with increasing attention that he was masking as warmth, said, "Miss Ashwell, Mira, if I may, I wonder if you have found everything you were looking for in the old household accounts. I feel I should offer to help with whatever is puzzling. I know those books very well. I am sure you do, she said. Something in her tone. The table had one of those random silences that fall on 8 people at once. In it, she said, plainly, to the table, I have found several things of interest. I wonder, Mr. Hartwell, if you would be willing to explain the corrected entries. I have brought the relevant pages, as it happens. She reached into the folio beside her chair and set the documents on the table, not the originals. She was not a fool. Careful copies, numbered, in her own hand, with the originals in Sir Edward's inside pocket, where she had placed them before dinner, and which was the arrangement he had agreed to. The alterations to the March through November accounts, and the dosage, which Dr. Baxter has just confirmed was strictly limited and not supplemented by his order, and the bottle count, which Mrs. Lamb has compiled in writing, and which Mrs. Philby witnessed this afternoon. She paused. I would like to understand the arithmetic. The silence was different now. It had a shape. Hartwell's face was very still. Not the Duke's stillness. This was the stillness of a man who has played well in a long game and has just seen the board change. He looked at the documents. He looked at Baxter, whose eyes were fixed on the tablecloth. He looked at Mrs. Philby, who was looking at her lap. He looked at Sir Edward Croft, and Sir Edward looked back with the mild, immovable expression of a man whose office is to sit still in exactly these moments. This is, Hartwell began. His voice was still warm. He was, she would grant him, remarkable, Mira, my dear. These are accounting errors and coincidences being assembled by a woman who is very skilled and very, how much more was given to her than the doctor prescribed, the Duke said. Hartwell turned to him. The warmth reconfigured itself. Edmund, that is not my name, the Duke said, very quietly. He had not raised his voice. He would not answer the question. Dr. Baxter has confirmed his dosage. The bottles say more was administered. Someone gave Eleanor more than was prescribed. Who ordered it? Hartwell said nothing. Who gave it to her? The Duke said. Hartwell stopped. His left hand was on the table, and it pressed flat, and then very slowly it lifted, and something in his face changed, not cracked, but shifted. The way a wall shifts before it falls, a settling and a giving way. She saw the grief in it then, the genuine, complicated grief of a man who has loved something and also destroyed it, and she understood that this was not simple greed. It was never simple. She filed that too, and did not look away, because looking away was a mercy he had not earned, and an understanding he had not deserved, and she gave him both. Mrs. Philby said, into the silence, in the plain voice of a woman who has waited 2 years, it was the drops. He told me the doctor had increased the prescription. He said he would take care of it himself, and I should not trouble myself. I gave them to her. I did not know. Her voice held steady on the last 3 words, and steadied further on, I did not know until this lady wrote to me. Agnes, Hartwell's voice broke on the name. Just the once. That is Mrs. Philby, Mira said. And I think that is enough. Sir Edward set down his wineglass and said, in the tone of a man assuming his professional self, I believe I should like to see those original documents now. And I will need to speak privately with Dr. Baxter and Mrs. Philby, with the Duke's permission. He looked at the Duke. Your Grace. Yes, the Duke said. He had not taken his eyes off Hartwell. What happened next was orderly, because Mira had arranged it to be orderly. Sir Edward rose, Baxter rose, Mrs. Philby rose. They withdrew to the study. Miss Vane, who had sat through dinner with the white, remote face of a woman reading news she had half expected for 2 years, remained seated. Mrs. Croft, the magistrate's wife, sat with her without being asked, which was good instinct, and Mira was grateful for it. Hartwell sat at the emptied table. The candles had burned down another inch. Mira was still in her chair, because she was not finished. She found the letter, Hartwell said. He was not speaking to the Duke. He was speaking to the tablecloth, or to something inside it. Eleanor, she found She had been going through my correspondence while I was away. She was bored and ill, and she found the letter from the moneylender. She knew what it meant. She knew what I had been taking. She would have told Edmund, and I would have been everything I had spent 20 years building. He stopped. I only meant to make her sleep. I told myself it was only to make her sleep, long enough for me to find another way. There was no other way, Mira said. There never was. You were simply afraid to see it. He looked at her then. Really looked at her. You are not what I expected. No, she said. I gather I am not, from several directions. She rose, steadied her crutch beneath her arm. You will not be prosecuted. That is the Duke's decision, which I have advised, and his reasons are his own, but mine are simple. A trial would require Mrs. Philby to testify publicly, and it would require reopening the Duchess's death in the newspapers, and the two people who deserve that least are the Duke and Agnes Philby. You will leave this house tonight. You will return everything you have taken, on a schedule Sir Edward will arrange, and you will go to your sister in Bath, where I am told you are welcome, and you will not return. If you do return, or if you speak of this to anyone who does not already know, the documents go to the magistracy and the newspapers both. This is not kindness to you. I want to be clear about that. It is protection of the innocent. But it will look like mercy from the outside, and you may choose to think of it that way if it helps you sleep. Hartwell was silent for a long moment. Then, quietly, with a dignity she had not expected to grant him and found she could, she used to say you were the clever one. Eleanor, she knew your family. She met you once, I think, when you were both young. She said the Ashwells had one daughter who would run the world and one who could dance, and the world had made a terrible mistake about which one it wanted. Mira looked at him. The candle between them was nearly gone. Eleanor was right about a great many things, she said. I hope you remember that. She left him there and went to find the Duke. He was in the corridor outside the study, standing in the way of a man who has been standing for some time and does not quite know what to do with his own body. She came to stand beside him, and for a while neither of them spoke, and the silence was the specific kind that does not require filling. It is done, she said. Yes, are you all right? He looked at her, and this time the composure was not deployed. There was simply the face underneath, which was tired and clear, and in some way she recognized as relief, the relief of a thing long carried that has been at last put down. I think I will be. I think I have not been, for 2 years, and I think from tonight I will begin to be. He paused. I do not know how to thank you. You do not have to thank me. It was the right thing to do. You keep saying that. Because it is always the right thing to say. She looked at her hands, which were steady. They had been steady all evening, and she was quietly proud of that in the way she was proud of most things she did well, privately, without commentary. There is a thing I want to say to you that I have been saying wrong in my head. I keep finding the grateful version of it and the pragmatic version of it, and neither of those is right. He was very still. I am going to marry you, she said, because I wish to. That is the only reason I am going to do it. The debt is your concern, and the settlement is your solicitor's concern, and I have been very clear with myself that I am not doing this because of those things. I want to be clear with you as well, because I have found that clarity saves a great deal of time. The quiet that followed is the kind that has a warmth to it. He said, after a moment, I have a thing I have been trying to say as well. Yes? When you walked into my drawing room, he said, and you looked at me with that particular attention, as though you were taking apart a clock and were quite confident you would find the mechanism, I thought, here is a person who sees things as they are. I had not met that person in 2 years. He stopped. He looked away, which was his method when he was saying something that cost him. I have been very careful not to feel anything for a long time. It has been a practical arrangement. And then you sat down in my library with my ledger in your hands and took out a pencil and started noting things in the margins, and I forgot to be careful. Mira looked at him, and she recognized, smiling. She did not smile often enough for it to be a habitual expression, which meant it was reliable when it came. Forgot to be careful, she said. That is the most romantic sentence I have ever heard. His face changed. It changed the way a room changes when a window is opened. There was suddenly more air in it. And then, for the first time in all the weeks she had known him, he laughed. It was a quiet laugh, contained and genuine, and it was the laugh of a man who had been away from his own humor for a long time and had just found it again. She flagged it in her memory and kept it there, the way you keep a very good thing, with both hands. I am not, he said, a man who makes speeches. Good. I cannot stand speeches, but I would like, he stopped. Started again. Would you mind if I did not stand in front of you and simply stood beside you? I have been standing in front of people for too long. It has not served anyone well. She thought of Eleanor's letter. Be careful of warmth. She thought of what Eleanor had intended by it and what the 2 years since had made of him, and what, perhaps, the 2 years might have been for. Yes, she said. That is exactly what I would like. They were married on a quiet Saturday in November, in a village church with 12 pews and a stubborn echo. The party was small. Mrs. Potts, who wept immediately and without shame and said it was the cold air, Sir Edward and his wife, Mrs. Lamb, Mrs. Philby, who had been asked and had come, and Celeste, who arrived late and incandescent in apology, and who embraced Mira with a genuine warmth that Mira filed as a revision of her previous estimate of her sister. The Duke's man of business attended. A dog belonging to the sexton wandered in during the third reading and sat under the Duke's pew and was ignored by everyone except Mrs. Potts, who, in the interval before the final blessing, slipped a piece of biscuit from her coat pocket. The minister, who had known the Ashwells for 20 years, said Mira's name with the particular warmth of a man who has always considered her overlooked. The ring the Duke placed on her hand had belonged to his grandmother, a thin thing of twisted gold with a small dark stone that caught the light wrong. It absorbed it rather than reflecting, and was the more beautiful for it. He had given it to her the previous evening with a note. My grandmother was also better with accounts than anyone gave her credit for. Keep it if you will. She had kept it. At the door, after, in the gray November light, he said quietly, in the voice she had come to think of as his true register, Eleanor said in her last letter, that whatever came after should be honest. That was the word she used. She said she wanted what came after to be honest. Then I will do my best to honor that, Mira said. You already have. He offered his arm, which she took, and they walked out of the church and into the pale morning, and Mrs. Potts said something very dry about the dog that made them both laugh. And that was the wedding. Hartwell wrote from Bath in December, a brief plain letter to the Duke, making no excuses and asking none. He had, he wrote, found work with a land agent there. He was learning the difference between what a thing costs and what a thing is worth. He did not ask for a reply and did not receive one, but Mira read the letter and thought, there is the grief beat, and it was genuine, and she filed it under the longer accounting of things that cannot be undone, but can slowly be remedied. Miss Vane, who had lived in Ashmore House since her sister's death, and had never been anything but courteous to Mira in the careful way of a woman who does not yet know if she is being displaced, came to Mira in the second week of December. With a letter of her own, a position had been offered, she said, in Dorset, as a companion to an elderly cousin, and she was inclined to accept it, and had come to say so directly. Mira had listened, and then said, also directly, you are not required to go. You are welcome here if you wish to stay. But if you prefer to go, that is also well, and I will write you a reference that says what I actually think of you, which is that you are intelligent, observant, and have managed a very difficult 2 years with more grace than most. Miss Vane had stood very still for a moment, and then said, you are very odd, you know. And Mira had said, yes, I have been told that, and they had come to a sort of understanding that was not quite warmth, but was something adjacent to it. And Miss Vane had gone to Dorset in January and sent letters occasionally that were warmer than anything she had said at Ashmore. Dr. Baxter's license was reviewed by the relevant college at Sir Edward's request and with the Duke's testimony, and was found to be in order he had prescribed correctly and was guilty of nothing but being deceived, which the review board noted was not a chargeable offense. He took the opportunity to retire to Devonshire, where his sister had been asking him to come for years. Mrs. Philby stayed. That had been Mira's quiet arrangement, though she had presented it as the Duke's decision, a position in the Ashmore household, at improved wages as the housekeeper's assistant, because she was good at her work and she had been wronged, and she deserved something solid under her feet. She cried when she was told, which was the only time Mira saw her cry. And then she went to work, which was the kind of person she was, and Mira liked her very much. Celeste married a clergyman in April, which surprised everyone except Mira, who had noticed in October that her sister's eyes went to the quiet man in every room and never to the loud one, and had kept this observation to herself as a wedding gift of sorts. The Ashwell house was sold in March to clear the remaining debt. Mira's father retired to a smaller house with a garden he had always claimed to want, and found that he actually did want it, which was a smaller grace, but a grace. He was never easy with Mira. The knowledge of what she had heard in the corridor sat between them in every room, but he had spoken to her on the day before the wedding. With an uncharacteristic plainness, she had done well, he said. She had done better than he had planned, which was, she recognized, as close as he could come to an apology, and she had accepted it as one. Mrs. Potts came to Ashmore in February because there had never been any question that she would, and because Mrs. Lamb had written to say there was room and she would be glad of the company, and because Mrs. Potts went where Mira was, had always, and that was the fact of it. She referred to the Duke as that one for approximately 2 months, until he fixed something in the kitchen garden without being asked, at which point her nomenclature shifted to himself, and everyone took this as approval, which it was. Almost a year later, on an evening in early October, when the light came in at the long angle of autumn and the trees at Ashmore were doing what Mira had been told they did in October, which was remarkable, and had been described to her but not believed, she was in the library. The door to the garden was open. She had in her hands a new ledger, the household accounts for the year, which were in order, and had been in order, and she expected them to remain in order, which was a quiet and profound satisfaction. On the shelf behind her were the old ledgers, restored to their proper alignment, the corrected entries annotated in her hand, with a note that explained what they were and when the correction had been discovered, and by whom, because she believed in complete records. She heard the door and did not look up, because she knew by now the sound of his step. "The Branksome Dairy has written again," he said. "They want the answer about the contract. The answer is yes, with the amendment I marked. The price they are offering for the third quarter is not the price they will accept, and I have told them so." She turned a page. "Also, Mrs. Potts has decided the East Kitchen wants retiling, and I think she is right, and I have included it in the winter estimates. You will object to the figure, and I will point out that she is right, and you will agree." He came to the desk and sat across from it, which was his chair in this room now, the one he had been sitting in for nearly a year. He looked at her with the look she had come to think of as hers. She was particular enough to have noticed that it was hers specifically, that it did not settle on other people the way it settled on her, and she was not falsely modest enough to pretend she did not value it. "You are going to be right about the retiling," he said. "I am aware. I was going to agree without the argument. You always say that. It is always true." She looked up from the ledger. The light through the open door was that particular autumn gold that she had not known before this year, and had now decided was the finest light she had ever seen, which she had told him only once, and which he had remembered in the way he remembered the things she said only once, which was completely. "There is something else," he said. She waited. He reached into his coat and set a small folded paper on the desk. She recognized the fold. It was the fold of a thing that had been carried for some time, refolded many times, kept. She opened it. It was a letter, a few lines in a hand she did not know, and it took her a moment before she understood that she did know it. Because she had seen it once on a document and had filed it away, it was Eleanor's hand. The letter was brief and old, and it said, "Whoever you turn out to be, I hope you are brave, and I hope you are kind, and I hope he tells you about the fire at Hartley, because it is a good story, and it made me love him, and it will make you love him too." Mira read it twice. She refolded it along the old creases. "Where did you find this?" she said. It was in the ledger from her desk, the one you reorganized in the spring. He was watching her face. She had tucked it between the October and November entries. "I think she wrote it. I think she wrote it knowing something was wrong and wanting." He stopped. "I think she was trying to look after the next one." Mira thought about Eleanor, whom she had never met, who had said the Ashwells had one daughter who would run the world. She thought about a woman keeping her own accounts in a ledger, tucking a letter between the months, trying to leave something useful behind. "Tell me about the fire at Hartley," she said. And there in the library, with the October light moving across the floor and a bird singing somewhere in the garden, which it had been doing all year at certain hours, and which she had come to think of as a house sound now, one of the sounds of Ashmore, there he told her, and it was a good story, and it did what Eleanor had promised it would do. And by the end of it, her hand was in his, and neither of them remembered putting it there. She did not weep. She had never found much use in it. But she looked at the man across the ledger in the autumn light, and she thought, I did not know yet, that corridor night, what the knock would cost her. She knew now. It had cost her exactly nothing and given her everything, which was the sort of arithmetic she had always believed in, the kind where the accounts, if you are careful and honest and willing to stand in the light with witnesses, eventually come right. If this story warmed you, if you have ever been the one who kept the household together and kept your own accounts quietly and wondered whether plainness was a flaw or a kind of armor, then you know what Mira carried into that corridor and what she found in the library and why Eleanor's letter matters. Come and sit with us a while. The fire is up, the kettle is on, and your chair has been kept. Tell me, if you will, in the comments, what was the moment you knew Mira had the measure of him? The question you want asked of Hartwell in that dining room, or the line she spoke that you will carry away? Those conversations are the best part of these evenings together. If you would like to stay close to the fire, there is a subscribe button that keeps your place here. And now, go gently, keep your own accounts honest, and be kind to the ones who lit your lamp before you knew you needed it.